Hello and welcome to Sweet Sycamore. We are in episode 7 of our Esther series, and if you are jumping in for the first time, welcome. I am so glad you're here. You don't have to listen to the other podcasts to know what we're going to be talking about today, and that's the great thing about the scriptures. We can jump in at any point, and I know that God is going to speak to us. But today we are starting with chapter 4, and just a quick recap on where we stand. An edict has just gone through the entire Persian Empire with an expiration date of every Jewish person. And the crazy thing was, King Xerxes wasn't sending out this massive army out of the capital of Susa to take out the Jewish people. The edict actually said that they were arming the normal Persian citizens to kill their Jewish friends and neighbors. And the incentive was, you got to take whatever belonged to them, the person that you killed. This is horrible, this is morbid, but this is where we're starting in chapter 4. So verse 1 starts out with Mordecai's reaction to this edict. Now remember, Mordecai is Esther's cousin, but also kind of like her adopted dad. And it says, when Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, he put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace gate without wearing, or while wearing, clothes of mourning. And as news of the king's decree reached all the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, and wailed, and many people lay in burlap and ashes. You guys, bad news is traveling really fast. I have lived through the age where there was no social media. I don't know about you. Perhaps you too have been when you were a kid and couldn't even fathom something like social media and news traveling that fast. But I remember as a kid, news traveling super fast without the aid of social media. And that was the telephone. That was word of mouth of women. I mean, everywhere you went, you'd stop in the grocery store and they'd be ringing up your groceries and they'd say, hey, have you heard? I mean, everything spread so fast. I was in college my freshman year in 9/11, and I will tell you what, we didn't have something that you could post and news spread super fast. But you know what? I knew everything that was happening when it was happening simply from word of mouth. And this is crazy bad news for the Jewish people. And news is spreading super fast, just showing you should never underestimate the power of the spoken word and how fast it can travel. But it's interesting to me, this is spreading among all of the Jewish people, and we see from Mordecai through that they are fasting and weeping and wailing and putting on burlap and ashes. But when we look at that happening in other passages of the Bible, there's another word that is used in all of those words, and that is prayer. But here in Esther, not only with Mordecai, but also with the people, they aren't not praying. Like, this word is not used. It's weeping and wailing and it's putting on the burlap and ashes, and then it just ends. It just stops. And it makes me wonder why. Why in all the other passages in the Bible does prayer go after this happens, but here nothing else follows? Now remember, the Jewish people were supposed to return to Jerusalem. They were released by King Cyrus many, many years later. Jeremiah 29:10 and 11, Jeremiah the prophet, he goes and tells the people, you are to return to Jerusalem. You're supposed to return to the body of believers. You're supposed to rebuild the temple. And if you do, God's blessings, God's care is going to follow you. And here we have these people living in Susa, living in Persia, not in Jerusalem. And they are having some hard times, but they are away from the body of believers. They didn't go. Why? Well, probably because many of them were actually born in this exile here in Persia. They were comfortable. This is all that they knew. They had businesses, they had friends, and they had family, but now they are literally given a death sentence. And they are forgetting their original roots. Now, burlap and ashes and weeping and wailing was part of their roots. But all of that was an outward appearance for something that was supposed to take place on the inside, and that was prayer. That was seeking God. But they have forgotten that part, and they are simply just doing the outward appearance, following their ancestors, but forgetting why that actually happened, why they actually did that. I think sometimes we have this problem, and it's called apathy. Let me explain to you something. They say statistically, the United States is following the trend of the United Kingdom of England as far as the Christianity goes, right? We're just several decades behind them. Let me tell you what's going on in England over the last 25, 35 years. In 2011, 59% of Wales said that they were Christian. In 2022, 46% of Wales said that they were Christian. I've witnessed this myself. I've been on a mission trip to England, and I have seen church building after church building. If you go, there's church buildings all over the place. Every single corner is a church building, but you know what? They were offices and they were businesses because there was nobody to actually fill them. Many people thought we were bizarre for going to England on a mission trip. But there were so many opportunities to tell people about Jesus because gradually they have kind of fallen away. They have forgotten where they started from. And did you know the United States is actually on the same trend? In fact, when we look at that difference between 59% in 2011 and 46% in 2022 and the decrease of people who said they were Christian, there wasn't another religion that went up that percentage. In fact, the box that went up that percentage where the people actually went from Christianity, where did they move to? The box that was labeled no religion. So basically they're saying, I don't want to be a Christian, but I don't really want to be anything. It's kind of apathy. It says, I don't actually care. Now, I have to tell you guys, we can say we don't care. We can say we don't care about God. We can say we don't care about eternity. But did you know that just because you don't care about it doesn't mean that it actually wipes it out? That doesn't make it non-existent. You can not care about your eternity, but eternity, one way or the other, is going to happen to your soul. You can forget about God. You cannot care about God. But did you know that God still exists? And actually, did you know that God doesn't actually forget about you, which is the graciousness and the mercy of our God. And that is why we have Mordecai and all these Jews forgetting their first love, forgetting what to do, because eventually they just didn't care. And in the moment when they actually needed God, they weren't quite sure what to do. So they went back to what had been done, which that was the fasting and the weeping and the wailing with the burlap and the ashes. Now, burlap or sackcloth, whichever version your scriptures say, it was a coarse material made of black goat's hair. It was not this comfortable burlap soft sack. It was extremely uncomfortable, but it was supposed to be only worn in a time of mourning. We also see it worn in a time of repentance in the Old Testament, and the ashes would be smeared on top of the head, and they were symbolic of ruin and desolation. This was supposed to be an outward sign of an inward condition, and that's why it was supposed to be partnered with prayer. But they are just doing this to show the outward sign of this inward condition, but not sure how to deal with the inward condition, which is what prayer would have actually healed. Now we see Mordecai is careful to obey the laws. Interesting enough, he puts on his sackcloth and ashes, and he goes to the palace gate, but he doesn't actually walk into the palace gate. He is following the law, again showing that he is a law-abiding citizen. Even as Haman is still trying to say these are crazy people who won't obey the king's law, he is obeying it here in this moment when the king has actually already condemned him to death. But why? Why would Mordecai go to the palace gates? Well, I believe, and I think we see it here in the scriptures to come, that he was trying to get Esther's attention. He couldn't go speak with her. She was separate from the rest of the world, and we'll see this fact in just a minute. So he went in with the sackcloth and ashes, and he went to the gate knowing that the word would get to her of his strange appearance. She was separated from the rest of the world, but people knew that Mordecai and Esther were family, the closest kind of family. And so he is going to get her attention, and he does just that. In verse 4, it says, when Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed, and she sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused it. When Esther sent for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed as her attendant, she ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was mourning. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace gate. She basically heard something is going on. Why would Mordecai be in these burlap and ashes at the palace gate? He's trying to get my attention. So you know what? I'm just going to try and fix the problem real quick, and we're going to just send him some other clothing. I love that. She's like, quick fix. Just send him something else to wear. But of course he refuses it because it wasn't about the fact that he had nothing to wear. She is completely removed from the problem, that she doesn't even know there is a real problem. She was isolated from her own community. This is something that should concern her, but doesn't. Because why would somebody think to tell her what was going on with the Jewish people or the edict that was going through the entire empire of Persia? I mean, why would this affect her? She had done such a good job at hiding the fact that she was a Jewish woman that nobody even thought or bothered to tell her that the full annihilation of the Jews was on the calendar. Hence, her just, let's put on different clothes. This will be a better approach for Mordecai. And I think sometimes the same thing happens to us. We compromise so much with the world. We deny who we really are. We deny we're children of the Lord. We deny who God is calling us to be. That we can find ourselves completely isolated and distant from God's people and probably out of touch with God's actual concerns for the world, just as Esther did. Have you ever noticed that when we compromise to belong, which we all crave a belonging, we all crave to fit in with our surroundings. I think that's innate in human nature. But the more we compromise that belongingness, the more we will actually feel alone, the more we will feel isolated from who we actually are, and perhaps even wake up someday and say, who actually am I? You see, that belonging, when we do it through compromise, is always short-lived. It always has a time and date stamp. It cannot be forever. Because I don't know about you, but if I am to deny who I am for a long, long period of time, I will start to question everything about who I am. And eventually, we have to stand up. Eventually, hopefully, if we're good-natured people, if we're loyal to who we actually are, we can't keep compromising. We can't keep sacrificing. So only after Mordecai refused the clothing, like he didn't swap out the clothing, but he actually said, no, I will not take what Esther is giving me, which probably made her question even more. Why wouldn't you at least swap out the clothing and then send me a message? But he said, no, I will not take it. Only then did she send someone out to find out what was going on. In verse 7, Mordecai told him, the man she sent out, the entire story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree issued in Susa that called for the death of all Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther and explain the situation to her. He also asked Hathach to direct her to go to the king to beg for mercy and plead for her people. So Hathach returned to Esther with Mordecai's message. And I love this because Mordecai is prepared. He knows what he's doing. He is at that city gate to get Esther's attention. And he is showing up. And he's not like, let me just write something down. Can I grab a pen and paper? No, Mordecai's like, okay, you're ready to take this message to Esther? Not only do I have the message already written down for you, I have a copy of the decree. I have the exact amount of money Haman has promised. I have it all, and I have the plan. I need Esther to do A, B, and C. I need her to go to the king. I need her to beg, and I need her to plead. Now, interesting enough, the actual term for begging for mercy and pleading for her people would have been the same language used for prayer. But this is not directed at God. He is asking her to beg and plead, not with the Lord, but with King Xerxes, with another man. And it just shows us that Mordecai wasn't praying on the side and crying out to God. He was coming up with a human plan. He was coming up with a human solution. And I sit there because, man, can I relate with this? I am so quick when dire news comes to my household to literally sit and say, okay, here is the plan. Here is how we're going to get through this. We need to fight in this way. We need to make sure this happens. We need to arrange this. And usually my first inclination isn't always to hit my knees and pray. And I think about that because I think, in the moments where everything's fine, I think, of course, man, I have a great relationship with God. I love my God. I know the size of my God. I know that God is going to take care of me. But when dire news strikes, I go, okay, how can I fix this problem for the least amount of pain instead of hitting my knees? And so I can relate with Mordecai here that he is trying to come up with a human solution right away. But we actually see that that's not what God desires us to do. You see, Proverbs 3:6 says, in everything you do, put God first, and he will direct you and crown your efforts with success. Christ is saying to us, God is saying to us in this moment that in everything we do, we have to put God first. In everything we do, we have to go to God first, and he's going to be the one to direct us. If we truly want success, we need to go to him first. And I have found that true in my own life. The moment that I try to create a plan, and then I try to follow through with that plan, and it's not the plan that God actually has in that moment, I mess things up even worse. The moments in my life when tragedy hits and instead I stop and I just pray and I give it to the Lord are the times that I go, maybe actually you want me to sit here even in this tragedy in just a minute because you are going to do something bigger than I can even imagine. I've seen this in my own life countless times. And so I would love to say that I've seen it so many times that I don't even make a plan first. I just go to God first. But not the case. It's still something that I am working on, and probably you are too. But I will say that I am slower now, I guess, at moving. Like I may come up with a plan, but then before I actually implement the plan, I pause and I'm like, wait a minute, I kind of have this a little bit out of order. I need to pray. I need to give these problems to the Lord. And that is where I'm going to be met with success, is by going with his plan and not my own plan. I don't know where you're at. Perhaps you are a little bit like Esther in this moment, and you find yourself where you have caved so much to who you actually are. You feel like perhaps you've even sacrificed your own identity. And if that is you, I want to encourage you. We're going to see with Esther, she's got some tough decisions. It's hard to pull yourself back to who you actually are, but it's possible. All is possible, and that God can even use their moments of compromise for his glory. And we're going to see this with Esther. Or perhaps you're just like Mordecai and you try to make a plan and you're going to man and trying to figure out the problem before you go to God. I can honestly relate to both Esther and Mordecai in these instances. But the great thing is just as we see with them here in the story to come, God's glory is still going to shine through their compromise. God's glory is still going to be used even when they are trying to come up with a plan before actually praying and going to God. See, God turns all things. He can turn anything into his glory, and he is going to do this through both Mordecai and Esther. This telephone game between Mordecai and Esther is not over yet. Mordecai has asked Esther, and Esther has a decision to make. And it's not an easy decision, but we are going to catch back up with this telephone game of back and forth, this poor eunuch that keeps running back and forth. We'll catch back up with that at our next episode of Sweet Sycamore. I hope that the Lord spoke to you today. And I just want to encourage you, wherever you are at, God is still in control. Even if you are living a life of compromise and you have forsaken your first love, or even if you're coming up with a plan right now that has nothing to do with God and you have totally forgotten about going to God, guess what? God is still in control and everything can be reversed for his glory. And I cannot wait to show you that in the episodes to come. Have a great day, and we will talk soon.